Let's talk about the school systems and how that does not work for a lot of neurodivergent brains. So in today's video, I really want to dissect and reflect on my experiences being in the school system and how it didn't work for me. This is just me kind of opening up the conversation, sharing my thoughts, sharing my experiences. It's not meant to be taken in a way where I think I am right and everyone else is wrong. Like any other conversation, I feel like this is meant to open up a wider discussion that is so important to have, especially when our society has yet to catch up with autism research and our understanding of autism. The only way we can explore how our neurotype affects us and how that fits into society on a grander scale is by having these discussions. This is going to be a long-winded disclaimer, but it's going to be the last disclaimer of this sort for hopefully a long time, so bear with me, because I don't want to have to foster an environment where I feel the need to constantly make long-winded disclaimers whenever I have to post a video and to have this constant fear that I'm going to be taken out of context. I just wanted to be completely honest with you guys through this long-winded disclaimer at least once through, so that at least those who actually, care to watch my videos consistently can understand where I'm coming from and why I do the things that I do and how I arrived at my decision making. Not because I necessarily believe I have to explain it to anyone, but it's because I can't expect you guys to know those boundaries and understand it, or let alone respect it, if I don't at least put effort into expressing it to others. Something that I really want to address is the concept of people who post things online are allowed to still have boundaries. And that's something that has been a conversation for a while now, and I think still will continue to be a conversation that will be had for years and years to come. But people tend to believe that if you are a public person, let's say celebrities or public figures, we think that they're not allowed to have boundaries. What people don't realize is that it doesn't matter how public someone is. It should never naturally equate to a person not having basic boundaries. That is just so not okay. And I feel like we see that trickling down the scale from really popular public figures and celebrities to more popular YouTubers to smaller YouTubers like me, or even smaller creators like random people on TikTok who post videos every now and then. Whatever level of content creation you are partaking in, I feel like you should never automatically assume that just because a person is deciding to share an aspect of their life means you're justified to say or do whatever you want to that person. Everyone is going to have different levels of boundaries that they are strict about or lenient about, whatever it is. But at least for me, boundaries that I have created for myself at this point is something that I've done because it is completely necessary for my mental health. I'm only able to process so much at a time. For me, something that I've realized over the past year and a half of my channel becoming bigger and bigger and having a lot more people perceiving me is that if I truly want to be accountable and responsible for myself, my growth, and all of that kind of stuff, I also have to set up boundaries so that I'm not putting up protective mechanisms in order to maintain my mental health. Because that's the truth of the matter, is because I'm not impenetrable, I have to create that system, or else I will have to turn into those people that just don't listen and don't read and don't consider. And I don't want to be that person. The thing is, as someone who has a platform of some sort, even if it's not big, I still have a responsibility that I need to take accountability for. And that responsibility is to build a safe space, not only for you guys, but it's also for me. And I think a big aspect of that is that this space is just not a place for people to do emotional labor for each other. We are all either mentally ill in some sort of capacity or extremely burnt out and tired and struggling in other ways. I want this to be a safe space where we can share our experiences and what comes up for us without having to carry the responsibility of another person's emotional weight. The truth of the matter is, It's really easy to process what another person has to say and understand certain parts of yourself that gets triggered by it without displacing the blame onto them and instead focusing that energy on processing why you feel triggered. You know what I'm saying? That is not my job. That is not my responsibility. I would love to sit here and emotionally process all of that for you and explain to you why you're valid, but that is just not my job. And I genuinely can't do that. Like, I can't reply to hundreds of comments every day doing that for you guys. And this isn't about, censoring people, because I've seen that so many times. There's a difference between censoring others who have anything different to say than you and fostering a safe space where you could have productive conversations about really sensitive and personal topics. The only way we could actually productively talk through that is if there's basic respect for each other and people don't feel like they're being attacked or don't feel the need to constantly defend themselves. We have to feel safe enough to lay those defenses down in order to actually listen to others and be able to share those experiences and ideas with each other. If you're triggered, explain why you're triggered, because that doesn't necessarily have to do with the other person. It's just they reflected a mirror back to yourself. And it's not even about what the other person is saying, it's more so about you. And if you're ever in a situation where you aren't sure what the other person was trying to imply, ask. Instead of accusing someone, just ask. A lot of misunderstandings and arguments could easily be eradicated from simply asking a question and clarifying. I will be damned if I ever create a space where people don't feel safe to share because they don't want another person to insinuate or attack them. It's one thing to do it to me. Yes, it hurts my feelings and I am going to draw boundaries to it, but it makes me even more upset that it would make another person in my community feel unsafe to share. I am not going to stand for that. I know that channels that foster arguments and foster a lot of angry discourse gets more views, gets more interactions, they get more popular, they blow up. But for me, it's genuinely not about blowing up, being famous, or getting a bunch of subscribers or interactions and then making more money. I care more about people feeling like if they want to share something or have a discussion, they know that they are safe to do so in my comment section. That is what I care about. I want people to know that if they want to disagree or explore a concept, that they are safe to do so because other people are going to respect what they have to say and you are going to respect what another person's going to have to say. This isn't about toxic positivity. This is about being respectful of each other and validating everyone's experiences, even if they're all different. And as soon as you start to attack, insinuate, accuse, you are immediately taking away a space where both people could take accountability and actually talk through those differences and learn from each other. To simply put it, this isn't a space for others to do emotional labor for each other, but for us to do the emotional labor for ourselves and to be witnessed within that process and validated within that process. Doing the emotional labor for yourself doesn't have to be something that you do all alone, but I don't think it's okay to push the work that you have to do for yourself onto another person. I think we're all completely capable of taking responsibility for ourselves and being respectful of each other while we do that. And we could share that with each other more freely and easily if we know that we are taking accountability for our end of the street. Focus on yourself. This isn't about other people. You're using other people as a way to reflect on yourself because that's what matters. You are what matters to you. Focus on yourself, how things make you think and feel. Share that. I will do the emotional labor that has to be done for myself, and I expect my viewers and people who partake in my community to do the same. But with that being said, let's get back to the discussion. So the reason why I'm making this video is not only to open up the discussion, but it's also for any of my viewers that are still in the school system, particularly people who are in high school, because I struggled so much throughout all the years of school that I had experienced. There's so many people that can kind of just ride by school for the most part, even if they don't like it, even if the school system also doesn't really suit them either. But I feel like for me, at least, I was genuinely not able to function in the school system, even if I tried so hard. And I genuinely tried so hard for so many years to just do the bare minimum that was expected of us in school, only to not be able to do so. And I think that's something that has to always be processed if you are an autistic person. There are so many things that we are capable of, right? But there are still aspects of our autism that is genuinely a disability with how society is built, at least, because even if you tried so hard, you still can't do it. Or even if you try so hard to do the bare minimum, it always comes at the cost in ways that neurotypical non-autistic people don't have to pay. And I think it's important as we navigate that little gray nuanced area of like, is autism a disability or is it not, to be able to know that yes, there's so many things that we are capable of that people may not expect, but at the same time that doesn't mean that we don't have a disability in so many other contexts. And for me, I want to be able to process why school was so impossible for me and disabling for me, and kind of dissect it in a more objective way so that it hopefully gives you guys some language to work off of if you ever have to have this conversation with another person, or if you're just simply on the journey of figuring out what you need to integrate for yourself, what accommodations you need to make life a little bit more sustainable for you and make more sense for you. Just to give you guys a little bit more context with what I mean when I say school was very impossible for me, I was never the type of person, let alone the type of autistic, that was studious. I think that looking back now is probably one of the biggest reasons why I never suspected that I was autistic, because I think oftentimes autistic people are seen as savants and very studious, very smart. And I was not like that at all. I was always at the verge of failing a class. And the only times I could pass a class was if I tried really hard and if I, to be honest, cheated in the tests and the exams and things like that. And even if I passed a class, it was never like A's, or even B's. It was always like B or C's or D's even. The earliest memory I have of realizing that I wasn't smart, and when I say smart, I mean book smart, like I wasn't good at memorizing information or processing a lot of like language information. And this is something I'm still discovering about myself and my autism even now as a 28-year-old adult woman, is how much language processing impacts my ability to process not only social interactions, but also like information gathering when it comes to like studying things, reading things, all that kind of stuff. I've always had trouble with language processing. And I'm sure if you guys watched my video that I made about like all of my report cards from kindergarten through 6th grade, you could see the actual proof in all those years of school that there was issues of processing language and processing like written things in general, verbal things. And that is the primary way that school is held. It's all shaped around language processing. I'll get into more of that when I go into like what I wish for in school systems to integrate more of, and that's going to include like sensory processing. But for now, I'm just going to stay away from that topic. I really struggle with language processing, and I feel like our school systems were not built for at least people like me and my neurotype, who processes things in a very sensory way, to actually tap into that process of learning as our primary way of ingesting information. Because if you think about it, you go to class, you sit down in the classroom in that tiny little desk, and the teacher literally just talks for an hour straight. And maybe if you're lucky, they have like a visual on the whiteboard for what they're teaching you. But even then, especially when you get to middle school and high school, there's no images. It's all like written words and numbers and spoken language. And for me, I cannot process information in that way. And I think this is something that I'm going to keep honing in on throughout this video, is that there's this idea of like, if you're autistic and you don't process things in that way, that must mean that you're stupid or you have intellectual disabilities and all that kind of stuff, which, I mean, that's a whole other conversation that I'm not going to open up right now. But because for a lot of us, we do have learning disabilities and intellectual disabilities. But I mean, let's kind of explore the concept of what does it mean if you simply don't process information the same ways as what is normalized. And if you were to have a way to process information in the ways that actually make sense to you, how much more smart are you going to be? How much more intellectual are you going to be? You know, I think that's a really interesting concept to explore here, because I know that my memory is so much better than an average person. Like, I can remember all these little details about where something is or what happened years ago or what someone smelled like, but I cannot remember a single thing that the teacher was talking about in their 1 hour lecture, you know? And so what I realized the past few years, being someone who frequents TikTok and frequents watching things online, is that when I ingest information in a visual way, I am able to process so many more complex concepts and teachings than if I were to just simply read it. Everyone is going to be different, right? Some people don't have that barrier, but for me, if there's no visual aid, it's basically impossible for me to process information without completely sending myself into a shutdown or meltdown trying to understand something through written word. It's been very freeing in some ways to be able to watch so much educational videos on TikTok, because I've been able to learn so many things that I've never been able to grasp my whole life, just because there's people out there who take the time to provide a visual aid to the things that they're talking about. A simple graphic, helps so much for me to understand the concepts of finances or politics and things like that. But if someone were to just be face-to-face talking to me about it, I would not be able to process any of that. And it's not necessarily because I'm not paying attention. It's not necessarily because I don't care. It's because it's really difficult for me to do so. And again, this is a really touchy subject, because a huge discussion that people have is using your neurodivergence as an excuse to not try. And again, I feel like these discussions are never that black and white. I think there's a lot of people out there who resonate with the experiences of, I'm still trying really, really hard to do my part, but it's just, why is there only one specific way to do my part? And why is that one specific way not conducive to me doing my part? Like, if I had another way to do my part that makes sense to me, I would not only be doing my part, but I would also be a lot less mentally ill or physically ill in the process of doing my part. And that's the thing that I really dislike about our school systems, is that there's only one way to do your part and there's only one way to learn. And if we really want to talk about the concept of being a productive member of society, shouldn't there be a way for people who have different ways of processing to do their parts in the ways that make sense to them and technically be more productive? If it all comes down to productivity, because that's just how our society is built. That's the reality, is that our society quantifies our worth as how productive are we to society? How much can we contribute? And a lot of the times, neurodivergent and or mentally ill people cannot contribute at the same capacity as others. If we had a way to contribute in a way that makes sense to us, we could actually contribute a lot, if not more than an average person. And I wish that our society was moving into a direction where that could be a lot more attainable for us. Again, I think neurodivergent people, especially autistic folks, we are able to process information a lot better when there's different sensory information being worked into the processing. The best way for me to learn and process information is through visual processing. For others, it's through sound, touch, whatever. But I feel like solely relying on language processing is probably, this is an assumption, it may not be right, but again, there's probably not research to back this up, because we are missing a lot of research. A lot of my friends who are psychologists and medical professionals will attest to this. I feel like a lot of the deficits that come with autism and the diagnosis is associated to how much of society is reliant on social norms and language processing. Honestly, just processing differences altogether. Because, outside of the hyperverbal autistics that are out there, I feel like a lot of autistics, being non-speaking autistic through all the middle ground autistics, we just don't necessarily process language in the same ways and at the same capacity as non-autistic people. I know for me, even though I'm not a non-speaking autistic, I struggle so much with language. I will go months struggling with being able to process my own thoughts, being able to process what other people are saying. And I don't even have to be, going through a shutdown or burnout. I don't even have to be emotionally dysregulated. It's just a part of my neurotype to have a difficult time with language processing. And it's always been like that. It's just, I never had the awareness or the capacity to be able to explain that to another person. And again, there's no research to even explain this phenomenon of the mechanisms behind apraxia, aphasia, and alexithymia. But a lot of us do struggle with that, especially if we're on the spectrum. And even though a lot of us are not necessarily non-speaking autistic, it doesn't mean we're not still struggling with language to some sort of capacity. And I think it's a big aspect of why I struggled so much with school is simply because all the information and interaction and the meat of everything is based in language, speaking it, hearing it, and understanding it, and all of that kind of stuff. And I think this is why a lot of the times autistic folks and deaf folks can resonate a lot with the way that we process things, because deaf folks have to rely on other stimuli to ingest information and process things. And so you have to think about the inverse as to how much more capable are you going to be and how much more functioning are you going to be if you had a way to interact with people without needing to necessarily have a conversation with them, or how much can you learn if there was no language but just pure visual aids. If your answer is somewhere in the realm of, I think it would be different for me, I think that's something for you to really reflect on, And going along the lines of having a different way to process things, I think being in a school system that does not support and enable monotropic focus is also a big reason why autistic folks really struggle within the school system. For those of you who may not know what monotropic focus is, it's a type of focus where you are only able to focus on a few things at once, and you tend to hyper-focus on those very few things. Hyper-focus not only in being able to ingest information, memorize it, but also it's the only thing you're interested in ingesting. You don't really have a wide breadth of interests outside of your special interests. I've spoken to a lot of my autistic peers about this concept and how monotropic focus could basically explain every characteristic of autism if you really think about it. I feel like our school systems is the first place in our lives where we really get taught to work against our monotropic focus. And again, if you're consistently being forced to work against the way that you need to process, not only are you robbing yourself of being able to process things to its fullest capacity and to your highest potential, but you're also working your body and your brain to the ground, trying to force yourself to do things in a way that just does not work for you. And that's the thing about the disabling part of autism is everyone is going to have a different capacity at which they struggle with being forced to process things in a different way. Some people could process things in a way after forcing themselves and really running themselves to the ground. And some people will run themselves to the ground trying and still not be able to achieve it. I feel like for me, again, I kind of am in the middle. And if anything, on the side of I forced myself, I ran myself to the ground, and I still couldn't really achieve it. I'm the type of person that would have never been able to function and find a place in neurotypical society and in neurotypical workspace. And that was something very overwhelming that I was processing long before my diagnosis, is that I had become aware that I was never going to be able to work a 9-to-5 for the rest of my life until retirement. And it's not because I didn't want to, it's because I literally was incapable of that. And that was something really scary for me to even realize, because it made me feel like I would never get to the point of being able to take care of myself. Like I will always be reliant on my parents or another person, because I just could not hold down a job and pay my bills and balance everything. I just couldn't, even though I really wanted to. If you think about it, Our school systems promote the exact opposite of monotropic focus. You're constantly being torn away from being able to focus on something or being forced to focus on something when you cannot or don't want to focus on it. I've been out of high school for a while, but I think you had like 5 or 6 periods, right? And each period is about an hour long. If you think about it, like even if you went into a class where you liked what you were learning about, so for example, if I was learning about the planets and whatnot, or the ancient civilizations, even if I was really into it and I was ingesting that information, before I could fully dive in, class is over and you have to move on to the next one. And as an autistic person, that is extremely dysregulating, to never be able to tap into your focus before being ripped away from the subject that you're focusing on. Because I was never able to tap into my sense of focus, I was always in this weird dissociated state because I couldn't focus on other things while being forced to focus on this particular thing. But also, I could never fully focus on one thing before being ripped away from it. And so I think my body's response to all of that is to just never really focus on anything. And my mind was always just like blank, you know? And when I think back on the years of my life where I was the most dissociated, it was in high school. But also I think the high school environment, or school environments in general, are so overstimulating. It's crazy. Like, I'm sure every situation is going to be different, but for my high school at least, the classrooms never had windows and it was very bright fluorescent light. You're sitting in these tiny uncomfortable desks and there's so many people in the classroom and you're just being ripped away from one classroom to another, and you have no time to regulate yourself physically. Like, you don't get to stim, you have to sit still. Sometimes teachers don't even let you use the bathroom, and so you're holding in your bladder. Again, being physically dysregulated and sensorily dysregulated, it furthers and worsens that dissociation. I remember the very few times that I would stim in class, I would be sitting there, you know, picking my hair because I have trichotillomania. And there would be so many times where I wouldn't even realize that I was picking my hair and stimming. I remember one of my teachers made fun of me in front of the whole class. I don't think he did it out of malice. I think he was just a silly, goofy teacher and was trying to be personable. And like, sometimes that like crosses a boundary because I mean, how is he supposed to know that that would hurt my feelings? But nonetheless, like, it doesn't matter what his intention was, he still impacted me, right? I was sitting there picking my hair and then he stopped his lesson mid-sentence and he was like, "Oh, look, Irene is picking her hair again like she always does. I wonder how much piles of hair is around her desk this time." Everyone looked at me. I got really self-conscious because I looked down at my desk and there was just all this hair surrounding my desk. I remember since then, I never picked my hair in that class again. Those are situations where I was somewhat regulating myself in stimming, but lost access to be able to regulate myself because it was not socially acceptable to stim and people are going to judge me negatively for stimming. And so I had to learn through situations like that to hold my body and constantly flex it almost in order to stop myself from stimming. And so I was constantly in a state of dysregulation, holding in all that tension. And that's also why I struggle with chronic pain and why I have to get my jaw joints replaced at the age of 28. Even though I'm so young, I have degenerative joint disease because of situations like that. That's why this conversation isn't as simple as, oh, people should stim when they need to. It really does extend outwards to what are the long-term impacts of being chronically dysregulated and not being able to have access to regulating yourself every day, every situation, every space, you know? And people really misunderstand the need to stim. I feel like sometimes people think it's like an emotional regulation thing, which sometimes it could be. But a lot of the times for autistics, the need to stim isn't necessarily connected to our emotions. Sometimes being able to stim helps us process information better. Not being able to have access to that stim not only holds us back from regulating ourselves, but it also holds us back again from our potential to process something to the fullest capacity. And I think another aspect of what made school really difficult for me, and this isn't going to apply to everyone, but it does for me, is that as someone who was neurodivergent, but also dealing with mental health issues, our school systems definitely does not support mentally ill people. It just simply does not. It enables you to have to dissociate and numb yourself in order to function. And I feel like that did not work well for me, because I'm the type of person where if I am struggling with something and I am emotionally dysregulated, I cannot focus on anything else except that issue. And I think a lot of this has to do with my monotropic focus. So if something happened at home and I didn't feel safe or it was bothering me, I was never the type of person that was able to go to school and just forget about what's happening at home and be present. And then once I got home, I resumed being dysregulated again. I was the type of person where something happened at home, I brought it with me to school. I was not able to concentrate. I was not able to socialize because I was emotionally dysregulated. And I was not able to focus on homework while being at home either. And so I was basically incapable of participating in school because I was focused so much on the ways that I was struggling and suffering. I feel like that's something that I don't really see talked about very often, is how PTSD or CPTSD interplays with autism, because I feel like there's a very specific type of autistic that is the type that hyper focuses on the trauma and the emotions you're feeling within that trauma, and you almost feel completely enveloped in that emotion and you are not able to focus on anything else. Whereas non-autistic people more or less can tear their focus away, compartmentalize, and do other stuff. I am completely incapable of that. I mean, I would love to have that skill. I think it's very valuable, but I just simply am incapable of it. That's something I still struggle with to this day. If I am having a bad mental health day, I am just not able to work. I'm not able to talk to friends. I have to just focus entirely on what is triggering me and process that, regulate myself through that. Because even on a smaller scale, you're not able to take breaks or regulate yourself. So how is that gonna be applicable to larger scale things when you're dealing with PTSD and whatnot? And that's why I think when we're talking about the repercussions of that, like people who end up in the prison system or all that kind of stuff, a lot of the times it's not as simple as they are just bad people. It's a lot of mixtures of intersectionality. What is this person's circumstances that they're born into? What does their appearance mean in the context of how society understands them? How does their neurotype affect the way that they're able to process information? How does their mental illness have effect in the way that they're able to be an effective member to society? You know, all of that kind of stuff. And a lot of the times there are a lot of intersections of all those things. A lot of the times neurodivergent people are mentally ill. A lot of the times people of color are mentally ill, and neurodivergency looks so different on every person. I feel like there's a really weird phenomenon that occurs when you are an autistic person that is incapable of understanding and following rigid rules. And I think that's something that people wouldn't expect, because a key aspect of autism is being very rigid, right? But I think what people don't understand is that there are so many times within our systems where the rules are so rigid, but it's not consistent. And I think that's what really bothers some of us, is when there's inconsistent, rigid rules. And what that means is there are these really rigid rules that you have to follow, but it doesn't necessarily benefit the greater cause or the greater good. For example, if schools only care about people showing up and learning and getting high test scores, then wouldn't it make sense to create an environment where there's different ways to learn the information and ways to score higher on the tests? But that's not the case. The schools just want you to learn the way that they need you to learn. In that sense, rules like that don't make sense to brains like mine, because not only does the rigid rules not make sense to the cause, but I think a part of that inconsistency is that the way that they hammer down on the rules and who they hammer down on doesn't make sense either. So a lot of the times, something that I noticed is that teachers will hold specific students accountable to the rules, but not other students who are breaking the rules, right? And so that to me was also very confusing. It was confusing in the school system. It's confusing to me in the workplace. It's confusing to me whenever I see it anywhere. But particularly the school system, I think it bothered me the most, because when you get a bunch of kids in one area and a bunch of adults who are in charge of these kids, there's a lot of power imbalances there that is really uncomfortable. If you're going to punish a kid for doing something wrong, then you should punish every kid for doing something wrong. At least be consistent with that. But a lot of the times, teachers, I feel like, are so biased, and they have their favorites, and they have kids that trigger them, and so therefore they target those kids. And a lot of the times, the kids that adults target are somewhat neurodivergent, I feel like, because they just don't fit into the norm and they don't follow things the way that is expected. And I feel like teachers tend to take that personally. Instead of doing the inner work and processing why they feel triggered by the kid, they exercise their authority over the kid and force the kid into submission or punish the kid. And that is something that I never understood, never agreed with. And I have been on the receiving end of that sort of interaction so many times throughout my years of school, is these moments where I would question the authority, question why things are being done a certain way, and why am I the only one getting in trouble for it. I feel like the adults were never able to actually listen and appropriately respond to it and take accountability, or even just explain it to me. They were just immediately like, you're doing something wrong, you're a problem, you need to fix it, or you need to be punished. And I think that's something that honestly was very traumatic as an undiagnosed autistic person, is going through so many situations where I felt like no one else was able to actually understand what was happening. And it was so easy to demonize me as the kid and just take the adult's word at face value and trust them. I'm sure a lot of you have experienced this, like times where the adults were the scummy one in the situation or the morally incorrect one in the situation, but it was just easier to trust and support the adult and assume automatically that the kid is wrong. I remember in high school, I just had such a difficult time with my teachers. One time in my art class, we were supposed to spend the whole class time painting our projects that we would turn in at the end of the school year. And for me, because our class was only about like an hour long, if not less, I wouldn't paint in class because it takes a long time to set up your whole section. You have to get your easel, you have to get your canvas, you have to put out all the paint, you have to get your water, your paintbrushes, you have to start painting. And then the whole cleanup process is a whole thing too. And so you only really get maybe like 20 to 30 minutes to paint. And for me, when I paint, I need at least 3 hours to get into it. I surmised to myself that it wasn't a good use of my time to paint there. I would opt to painting at home on the weekends and paint for hours on hours, like 3 to 6 hours. But as I was sitting in class, just like doing my own thing and like resting, because the whole school day is always so overwhelming and I had such low spoons. But I remember my art teacher at the time, when she was looking at all of the projects that I had turned in at the end of the school year, even though my projects were objectively better than a lot of my classmates, she gave me a C-. And I was so confused. I remember going to her and being like, why do I have a C-? She basically was like, well, because you don't paint in class like you're supposed to. And I was just like so baffled by that. Because in my mind, I'm like, if I were to paint in class, I would not only hate it, but I would probably be painting worse than if I were to be at home for hours painting. And not only that, aren't you supposed to just grade the quality of my work? Like, why does it matter how I get to the end point? Not only that, but she was like, because I never see you paint in front of me, I think that you're not actually creating your own work. I think you're getting someone else to do it for you. And so that accusation on top of that sent me over the edge. It just did not make any sense. It was so offensive. It's insane to me that a teacher was talking to a teenager like that. Things like that really impacted my mental health in such profound ways. It feels really helpless too, because even when you find ways to work around the system and try to deliver the products that is expected of you, just because you don't do it in the way that it's expected of you, the product that you end up creating doesn't even matter because you're simply not assimilating to the norm. And so even though I spent hours on hours and so much time and energy on my paintings, I still got a C- because I wasn't painting in the ways that the teacher wanted me to paint. And on top of that, she even accused me of not doing my own work because it was too good and she wasn't seeing me paint my own paintings. And I think it's because of experiences like that where I feel like I will always be open to listening to the child's side of the story. Even if there's situations where I would think like, okay, what that kid did is not okay. There's always a reason to it. I believe when kids say things like, this person wasn't being fair, this adult was being fucked up, whatever it is, how they respond to that is a whole other conversation. But that doesn't excuse how a lot of adults in these situations where they have power over kids abuse their power over kids and in ways that are not okay. It's not that I necessarily take the child side automatically, but the way that I view it is that this is a child, and just because they're a child doesn't necessarily mean they're automatically wrong. And also on the same front, because they're a child, it is your job as the adult to know how to interact with the child, talk to the child, and teach the child in a way that makes sense to them so that they could learn whatever information they need to learn and have whatever realizations they need to have. And that's the thing, is kids are dependent on adults. There has to be a better balance of like holding the child accountable, but also taking accountability for ourselves as the adults to make sure that the kids are able to ultimately learn and be a part of society in the ways that we expect them to be. And I wish that our society was more open to the idea of holding each other accountable, especially when it comes to other adults holding adults accountable, not just demonizing the kid. I saw this TikTok the other day where someone was saying how kids are the most abused population, and I genuinely believe that. Because it's so easy to abuse children, and usually children just do not have the power within society over adults. It's that imbalanced. And I feel like in that way, I feel really passionate about protecting children and standing up for children and being there for children whenever and however you can. Now I want to talk a little bit about what I would love to see in an ideal school system. Again, this is just me going into my imagination and thinking about what I think would be best for people like me. And this isn't going to be for everyone, right? Just this is what I wish I had access to. I'm not saying that society should do this or whatever. It's just, again, a conversation, exploring concepts, processing things out loud together. You know how our school has us learning subject matter after subject matter after subject matter? There's math, science, English, social studies, so on and so forth. And there's tiers to that, right? I wish our school systems taught us different information on top of that sort of general education. I wish that general education could highlight honing in on skill sets more, what it means to hone in on a person's skill sets and identify what those skill sets are and what to do with it. So if you're a person who's very observational, how do you actually tap into your observational skills? How can you utilize that skill set? And how can we utilize that skill set to allow you to further learn and ingest information so that you could process things to the fullest potential that you can? I think also learning the history behind those skill sets as well, like what type of people throughout history have those same skill sets as you and how have they utilized it? I think learning the mechanics of your skill sets are also really important. So if someone's observational, instead of just talking about it like a subjective, abstract idea, actually learning the mechanisms of what it means to be an observational person so that the natural skill set that you already have, how can you expand and evolve that skill set to be a lot more refined, therefore be able to hone into it a lot better. I also think it'd be amazing to learn about the ethics of the skill sets that you have. So knowing that you have this certain power, how can you create value systems and ethics around that specific type of skill set, and how that could be integrated into society, into your interpersonal relationships, into your job, all of that kind of stuff. I think it would also be great if we had a way for students to learn about how to take care of themselves, what it means to become an independent person, what it means to be responsible within your interpersonal relationships, all of these things that I think parents are supposed to teach us. But the reality is, a lot of the times we don't have access to healthy, knowledgeable parents that have time, energy, and access to resources to teach us these types of things. Realistically, a lot of kids out there have parents that work their jobs, come home, are completely exhausted, and are somewhat disconnected from their responsibilities as parents. And for those types of kids, where are they supposed to learn the information of what it means to keep your house clean, do your chores, run errands, check in with your friend, draw your boundaries, communicate? These are skill sets that are still so important and necessary to be a part of society, but a lot of our population is not learning it. And so we have to make up for that somewhere. If you're not learning that in your family dynamics, then you have to have another place to learn it. And I wish that there was a class where you could really have a mentor or a teacher to teach you those skill sets. And that would make such a big difference for a child who isn't set up the best ways to still have access to that information and utilize it, take accountability for their end, and still be like a productive member of society. I think it would also be so necessary to integrate classes where kids can learn about what rights do they have as citizens to their country. This is something that I didn't necessarily care for much of my life, but I think now that I'm a 28-year-old adult woman and I have somewhat of civil duties, especially when it comes to voting and things like that, I wish that there were more classes that taught me what it means to vote and how to determine which candidate I want to support, what certain laws mean as a citizen, what rights do I have to protest, or what part can I play in the grander scheme of my city and in my country. Because I feel like nowadays, so much of younger millennials, Gen Zers, and all that kind of stuff, we're so passionate about humanitarian movements, but we don't have the objective knowledge to know what we can do about it. And I feel like I wish we could learn about those civil duties and what we have rights to in school so that we can actually have the information we need to do something about the things we're passionate about. Because at the end of the day, I think sometimes a part of having poor mental health is being really overwhelmed with your empathy or with all the issues that affect you and your loved ones and humankind, but not knowing what to do about it. I feel like a lot of the times that inability to follow through with action could really take a toll on a person. And so I think having access to this sort of objective information is so necessary and I think could make a huge difference. But of course, that wouldn't benefit the government with how everything is ran. But I mean, in my ideal world, I think people would know that kind of stuff. I also wish that there were classes that taught you how to manage your finances and everything that has to do with finances, how to pay your taxes, how credit cards work, how to develop a savings account. Because again, if you're a child that doesn't have parents that teaches you that stuff, then where are you supposed to learn that information? A lot of the times people don't learn about that until they're spat out from the school system and are immediately needing to be an adult, go to their 9-to-5s, and start paying taxes and all that kind of stuff. And that is extremely overwhelming, especially for autistic folks who are already struggling to understand and partake in the system. I know my parents didn't teach me about taxes and finances and things like that. That's something I was learning about as a 26-year-old woman, I feel like it'll be better for us to be integrated slowly through the years and understand this information through the years so that once we get to that age of being financially independent and things like that, we know how to navigate it. And even in a long-term scale, we know how to set ourselves up better and know what to expect throughout the different stages of our lives. And on that same front, I wish that there was a way to learn about how to healthily communicate and conflict resolve. Because again, if we're not learning it at home, where are we supposed to learn that stuff? I feel like nowadays we hear so many people scrutinizing others for doing harmful things or saying harmful things and all that kind of stuff, which yes, I think it's important to be able to talk about it, but we also don't understand that those are the same people that were neglected by the systems and by their families and never had a chance to learn what it means to be a healthy person, what it means to have healthy conflict resolution. And so at what point are we supposed to take accountability and know that if someone never learned it, where and how are they going to learn it? Because that has to take place. We can't just expect people to be completely healthy if they never had a chance or a way to learn what that means. And for those people out there who never had the access to learn how, but still did it anyways, that's amazing. That's great, but not everyone has the capacity to be like that. Like, those are very special people that we could really appreciate and look up to. But the truth of the matter is, if you were never set up correctly, if you were never taught otherwise, and you're having to actively outgrow your programming that's unhealthy, while also simultaneously having no access to healthier ways to be, we have to be a little bit more understanding. And those people need better systems and access to better ways to do something about it and take responsibility. Because the whole concept of you need to take responsibility is nice, but what is the follow through? What are the objective things that a person can have access to learn that kind of stuff? Especially if they're struggling financially. A lot of the times there is no access to information if someone's struggling financially. Or if someone's struggling financially, a lot of the times in order to make ends meet, they don't have the time or energy to put into having to do all of that labor to figure out how to be a different person. We have to be like a little bit realistic there, you know? I also wish that our school systems integrated a lot more sensory regulation and physical regulation practices interspersed with classroom sitting down settings. So having time to move your body and stim. I think as well, having classrooms outside of the classroom could do a lot. So I dream about classrooms being held outdoors, for example. You know how in Harry Potter, they had their class outdoors with Hagrid and they were learning about things and being able to actually see, touch, interact? I wish we had more classroom settings like that. Not saying every classroom has to be like that, but at least some, like one or two, where you can actually be integrating movement and interaction within the things that you're learning. I think that sort of tactile, sensory-based learning could do so much for neurodivergent folks. Not only is it going to be regulating, but it could also help them process a lot more effectively. And I wish that there was more opportunities to tap into your monotropic focus. So I feel like for me, instead of doing 6 classes in one day, being able to do 2 classes in one day. So having more freedom to build out your schedule. If there's an objective amount of information you need to learn in 1 week, I wouldn't necessarily work well with learning bits and pieces of that every single day and having 6 classes a day. I would do better with having 2 classes each day and having hours to focus in on those subject matters and having different ways to really ingest that information. I feel like I would have been such a more effective student if I had access to a different type of schedule. Because for those of you who are autistic, could you imagine going to high school and only having 2 classes for that day, but hours within each class? It would make the learning process a lot easier for us because we could really just hyper focus. And if we have a question, we could ask it. Once the question is asked, we could spend hours just practicing it over and over again until it really gets in our brains. Little things like that would make such a big difference. I also wish that our college system was a little bit different in a way where I don't think it's necessarily completely effective if someone has to choose the major that they're going to concentrate on for the rest of their lives right out of high school. Because how are we supposed to know what we want to do if we never learn what our skill sets are, if we never learn what our neurology is, what works best for us, what type of jobs are we most suited for? Because the jobs that we're suited for is a very objective and subjective thing. We have objective skill sets on a subjective personal level. We have the capacity to do X amount of things and we have no capacity to do other amounts of things. And so if we have no concept of that, how are we supposed to know what subject we want to study for 4 years, graduate with that degree, and only be able to work jobs within that degree? The amount of people I know in my personal life that graduated with 4-year bachelor degrees in subject matters they care nothing for and end up not doing anything within that major, and they find a completely different career is astronomical. And I think that is such a shame because it's a waste of money, it's a waste of time, and we're honestly like gypping ourselves out of people being able to reach their fullest potential to like make our society a lot better. Even saying that out loud, I'm like, okay, Irene, you're getting a little bit like too passionate about this, but imagine if you didn't have to choose one thing to focus on. Imagine if you went into college knowing what your skill sets are and you spend time actually like learning those skill sets and the different jobs that you could perform within those skill sets. And not only are you learning how to objectively do the job, but interspersed with classroom time, you're also able to practice doing the jobs itself by shadowing other people at their work environments and things like that. How much more effective of a learning environment would that be for, let's say, ADHD people? You know, instead of having to sit in classes for hours on end and do homework, you learn about how to fly an airplane, or you learn about how to do something. And then the next class, instead of going back into the classroom, you go on the site and you learn directly from the person who does the job. Or even just learning about something for a semester, and then the next semester is all application and shadowing. That would be so interesting and so fun. For me, at least, I learn so much quicker and better when I'm actually able to be there physically and learn face to face, interacting with the thing, making mistakes and having someone tell me, that's not how you do it, this is how you do it. I learn so much better that way, and I can be so much more detail oriented and create such higher quality work than an average person if I'm able to really hone in on those ways of learning, you know? And even outside of the school system, I wish there was a way for people to have access to work different types of jobs and have freedom for that, because there's so many people out there that would thrive better in being able to do, let's say, 4 different jobs throughout their life. You know, thinking about myself, there's so many different interests that I have, and I'm like hyper focused on it. On one end, I would love to be a barista. On the other end, I would love to be a criminal investigator. On another end, I would love to be a psychologist. On another end, I would just love to be a stay-at-home mom. So if I had the freedom to just hyper focus on a career for, let's say, 2 to 4 years, and then take a break and then switch over to another career for 2 to 4 years and then switch over to another one, I feel like not only would my mental health be better, but I feel like when I'm actually at the job, I won't deal with burnout as much because I'm so passionate and so hyper focused on it that when I'm at those jobs, I'm able to fully thrive and produce really good work while I'm there before I burn out and need to switch to the other job. In general, the concept of having different ways to learn, having different ways to build out your schedule, having different ways to exist within the workforce is something to really think about, and I wish we had more access to that kind of stuff. But again, those are like really big systems that we're going to have to deconstruct and change, and that doesn't happen overnight. And I don't even know if I'm going to see any sort of change in our systems in my lifetime, but I hope I see changes in the school system in my lifetime. But either way, I think this is something so interesting to talk about. And with that being said, I would love to pass off the conversation to you guys. What do you think about some of those concepts that I talked about? Did you guys struggle with the same things? And what does an idealistic school system look like for you? I'd be curious to see what ideas you guys have with that. And let's just kind of like explore this together and see how many of you have similar ideas to me in terms of an ideal school system, and how many of you guys have thought about something that I never did, but I also agree with. Either way, share them with me in the comment section down below. Thank you guys for tuning in on today's video and being a part of this discussion. And for those of you who are in high school or in school in general and you find yourself struggling, trust me, I feel for you. It's not easy. And I don't even have like something encouraging to say as in like, it'll all be okay if you do this, because it's just not that way. You know, a lot of the times we have to find our own ways to make it okay for ourselves. And it's going to be hard and there's going to be struggles. But if there's any sort of encouragement I can offer you is that, like myself, there are so many other neurodivergents out there who are trying so hard to figure out how to make life work for them. And sometimes we find things that work for us and we share it, and sometimes we don't and we're still trying to figure it out. But we're all in this together. We're all trying to figure it out, and you're not alone in that process. So yeah, I don't necessarily want to say it's going to be okay, but I at least want to say you're not alone, you know? But yeah, take some time to regulate yourselves today. Drink some water. Breathe. I will see you guys on the next one. Take care.